Hey there. Thanks for tuning in. You ready for another episode of my Bigfoot sighting? Alright then, let's do this.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, love's in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.
My Bigfoot sightings happened in 1967, 68. I was in the 5th grade many years ago. He's 64, so it's been a while. My mother and 5 of my siblings, there were a total of 6 of us kids. We lived in a house in Southern California, and it was right off a road in the middle of an orchard. Behind our house were lots of orange trees. Across the street was an orange orchard with lemons, avocados as well. The nearest home was about a half mile away from where we were living. And me and my siblings, mainly my brothers, I had 2 brothers just older than me, an older sister. I was the 4th, my younger brother, and then my younger sister. And I seemed to hang out with my older brothers more than anything. So we often played in the orange orchards, hide and go seek at night, or throwing rotten oranges at each other. And we ran around in the orchards quite a bit. My brothers also had BB guns and stuff, and they used to go out and shoot rabbits, and we had rabbit quite a bit, and my mom and dad were separated. My dad was a deer hunter. He liked to go out and hunt deer. We were raised off venison. Anyway, we lived in this older home right off this road out in the middle of an orchard. I grew up in Southern California, an agricultural area. A lot of orchards, lemons, oranges, like I said. Quite often I would be left alone at the house or left watching my younger brother and younger sister. But this one evening, my mom happened to be home. My sisters and myself, we usually slept in a bedroom at the back of the house, and my mom's bedroom was at the front of the house. We had a front porch, and there was a garage. It was detached from the house. And in the back of the yard, we had a large avocado tree as well. And then beyond that, there was the orange orchards. My brothers slept in like the den. It was in the back of the house. Mom slept in her bedroom by the front porch. We used to think the house was haunted because we would hear noises. It sounded like sometimes someone was trying to get in our back door, or we'd hear noises alongside the house or bangs. So we just thought the house was haunted. We used to move around quite a bit. So we weren't in this house very long at all. I want to say probably 6 months. We moved quite frequently. And this one evening, I was sleeping with my mom by the front of the house. And like I said, her bedroom was right by the front porch. And she had 2 windows that faced the front porch, and then a window to the side of the house. And to the side of the house was the driveway. And then there was the garage, and there was a walkway between the garage and the house because, like I said, it was detached. And this one evening, for some reason, I woke up in the middle of the night, and I was just gazing. I was sitting on my knees, gazing out the window. And I don't know that anything specific woke me up. I just happened to be looking out and looking at the stars. And I sometimes like to do that. And all of a sudden, as I'm gazing outside the window, and again, the window was longer than it was wide and had a screen, and you could raise the window up and down to get fresh air. And of course, this was before air conditioners and stuff. And so the window was cracked a little bit, not very much, but it was open a little bit, but there was a screen. But I happened to be looking out the window, and all of a sudden I glanced to the left of me, and I could see something all of a sudden peep out from behind the house. And it looked like it was as tall as the house, and it was a black head, and it just peeked out. And it was really odd. And I'm looking at this creature or thing. And then all of a sudden it walks out from behind the house, and it starts walking toward the front of the house. And the one thing there were several things I noticed about it, but it was tall. It was almost as tall as the house. And again, I don't know, how tall the house was, but it was really lanky, thin and tall, and it was jet black. And the main thing that I was observing was the way it walked. It was walking like it was like floating, gliding or floating. It had a really weird or strange gait. And I just was looking at it and just thinking that, that's odd. And again, it's been so many years, but it just seemed like 1 second it's walking, and the next second it's looking at me through the window. And I don't know if this creature got down, but I know the creature was as tall as the house, so I don't think it was bending over. I think it got down and was looking at me, and it was either looking right at me at the same face to face, or a little up toward me, but it had red glowing eyes, and it wasn't sunlight or light off anything. And I thought for sure it was Satan visiting me, because that's what it felt like. It felt like it was something demonic. And I just remember those red glowing eyes, and it scared me to death. And I reached over to wake my mom up. Like, mom, something's at the window. And then I looked over and it was gone. It was totally gone. And I remember looking around out the window at the front of the house, and I didn't see anything, nothing. And I kind of tried to look down. I couldn't see anything. Knowing what I know now, could it have jumped on top of the roof of the house? Possibly. I don't know. All I know, it was just 1 second it was there, and the next second it was completely gone. And then, of course, my mom saying I was just having a dream or a nightmare. But I know what I saw. I know for a fact what I saw. And it took me years. Well, I forgot about it. Didn't think about it. I mean, my mom said I was having a bad dream. It didn't happen. And so I really just put it out of my mind. But I do remember my brothers and I would play out in the orchards and, like I said, play hide and go seek. And for some reason, I often felt like I was being watched. And there was a lot of times I would go by a tree and I'd raise the branches up real quick and look underneath, because I kept thinking that something's going to be underneath the tree looking at us. And so it wasn't uncommon for me to pull up the leaves or the branches of the tree to look underneath to see if something was there. Of course, nothing was ever under there, which I'm grateful there wasn't. I don't know what I would have done had there been anything under there. But I remember quite often, for some reason, thinking that something would be hiding under the orange tree or lemon tree. And, when this creature came to my window, I don't recall ever smelling anything at all. But, I know that it wasn't wearing any clothes. I mean, it didn't have clothes on. It wasn't black skin. It was fur or hair, but it was black, all black. And I used to refer to it in my head as Shadow Man, because it was so black. I mean, it was as dark as what a shadow would be. And that's how I refer to it, as like a shadow person or Shadow Man, because it was just so black. But, and then we moved from that area, And I really never thought too much about it. I just remember I had a friend who lived down the road, and sometimes I'd go visit her dad. Her family had property and orchards that they ran and owned. And when I'd leave her house late, I'd walk in the middle of the road. I would never walk on the side of the road. It was in the middle of the road. So I presume I did that because I was frightened for some reason, but I never really put much thought into it after that. Because like I said, my mom said, "Oh, you must have been dreaming or had a nightmare." And so I just thought, okay, maybe that's true. But I knew I saw what I saw. And then it was several years later. So I grew up in Southern California. And then when I was about 15 years old, my mother and some of my siblings moved to Oregon. And we used to go travel back and forth from where we lived in Oregon to Southern California. And we would stop at a rest stop or something if we needed to. It was pretty common. We go back and forth because my older siblings lived down there and we'd want to go see them. And I think I was about 14 or 15 years old. We were traveling back up from California and we stopped at a rest stop, and it was Willow Creek rest stop, and the Klamath River runs through that rest stop. And it's just, if you're going north into Oregon, it's just the other side of Shasta, which is my understanding, a well-known sighting for Sasquatch or Bigfoot in that area. And as you come down off Shasta Mountain toward Oregon, it's a rest stop. Anyway, we pulled in there for the night or for a few hours. And I remember my mom was driving. I was in the passenger seat and my brothers were in the back seat, and we were hanging out to get some sleep before we went on our way back into Oregon. And so we kicked back, went to sleep, and it was in the middle of the night and I felt something. I don't know if it accidentally hit or meant to hit, but something bumped the car and it just barely moved. And then I had this feeling I was being watched, and I opened my eyes and there was a creature leaning over the car. It was as wide as the car, and it was leaning over, looking at me through the windshield. And it was huge. It was brown, like a reddish brown with a little beige. It was a quick couple seconds. And when I opened my eyes, it scared me so bad. It took my breath away. I remember just that, noise of catching your breath, or just like somebody punched you in the gut. And that's, it just scared me to death. And I reached over. I just remember it was really ugly looking and huge. And I remember I reached over to wake my mom up again, and just took my sight away for a second to try to wake her up, like something's at the front of the car. And I look back and this creature's gone. And it's a big rest stop. There's restrooms there. And I remember when we stopped, there were cars, there were big trucks. I don't remember what was around when that creature woke me up, but my mom woke up. There was nothing there. It disappeared. And of course, I'm having a bad dream. It's, I had a nightmare. And it was just so odd because it just vanished. It was just gone. And I thought, okay, I don't have nightmares of big creatures looking in the windshield at me. It was horrible. And I remember just going back to sleep, because I thought, okay, well, maybe I am, because it's gone. It was just the weirdest thing. And then the next morning when we woke up, I didn't see any cars around. There was nobody in the parking lot. But when we left, I remember distinctly looking behind me because I wanted to remember that rest stop. And for some reason, I wanted to make sure I remembered that rest stop. And I don't know why, but, it was just really important to me because I thought, okay, something, it was just weird. And I never knew anything about Sasquatch or Bigfoot back in those days, especially as a kid, and never put two and two together, just never dawned on me at all. And again, I don't remember a smell at that time. And so that was my second encounter. And then in the 1980s, it was about 1985 or 86, my husband and I were staying with his sister in Estacada, Oregon. And we, with our kids, we were staying there with her for a while. And my husband and I decided to go out for a hike or a walk, just a day trip, walking through the woods and stuff. And there was highways that surround the area and stuff. So we knew we wouldn't really get lost. And there's homes throughout the woods and stuff. And so we were like, well, we're not going to get lost. We're bound to go by a house or a road or something. So it was during the day. It wasn't raining. It was a nice day. And so I remember there was a fence and it said no trespassing, just one of those wooden fences with posts that people put up. And I thought, well, we're only walking around. We're not doing anything. We're not hunting or doing anything that we shouldn't do other than we're trespassing, I guess. So we went over the fence and walked through this pasture, walked through some trees where some woods were, and we come out the other side of these trees onto this deer trail. I'm going to say it's a deer trail. It was about 4 feet wide trail. And I remember as soon as we got onto the trail, off to the left of me, there was a patch of dried grass. There was a big patch in this area that was matted down, like a herd of deer had been laying out there. And I thought, well, that's weird. They don't lay out like that in a bit, in that field together and to mat it down. It just seemed really odd. And then there was a tree, and I could see a tree break at the top that was broke off. And again, something felt off. And my husband and I, we used to go camping all the time. My husband was a logger for years. We used to go fishing. Sometimes we went hunting. I wasn't really a big hunter, but we had gone out a time or two. And so, just knowing the times we've gone camping and done things, that just something felt odd about the surroundings. And I could hear an owl, sounded like an owl hooting. And I just thought, well, that's weird. And I think it was about 11 o'clock in the morning. And then we walked about 4 feet onto this path. And next thing you know, I saw these large human footprints. And then about, 4 or 5 feet later, there was another print. And I thought, what idiot would be out here walking around barefoot? And I said, whoever it was is big, because the footprints were huge and they were wide. And I told my husband, I said, well, wait, I'm going to turn around and see if I can see where the shoe print is. Because I said, they must have been wearing their shoes and taking their shoes off. So I walked back and I could never find any shoe prints. And I said, well, that's really odd. I said, there should be shoe prints. And I said, I can't imagine them walking around here barefooted this whole time. And we found a total of about 3 footprints. And we also started smelling something like it was dead or rotten, like a carcass. And my husband picked up a long stick and was poking around, like trying to find whatever it was that was dead. And we were hearing like birds. It just sounded odd. And I mentioned to my husband, I said, and I've been around black bear in Oregon. I mean, they they'll run from you. They usually would just take off. But I thought, well, okay, maybe there's some bear around. Because all of a sudden I started feeling really uncomfortable and like we shouldn't be there. And I told my husband, I said, I don't know what it is, but for some reason, I don't feel comfortable. We need to leave. And so we did. And we probably walked maybe 40 yards. And then there was a highway. I mean, it was really close to where we were. But that's where those footprints were that we found. And of course, knowing what I know now, I'm thinking that, the Sasquatch was probably looking at us or watching us the whole time. And we might have even woken up because we were talking when we were walking through the forest before we got to this clearing where this trail was, where we found these human looking footprints. And back then, again, I had no idea, didn't think anything of it. And also I wanted to kind of revert back to when I was a kid. My dad was a deer hunter, avid deer hunter, and it wasn't uncommon for us to have a deer hanging in our garage, and he was skinning it out and butchering it and stuff like that. And I remember one time, one house we lived in, he said he saw something looking through the window, and I remember him bolting out our front door and chasing something. He came back out of breath, and he said something was looking through the window, and he went chasing it, but he couldn't catch it. And so again, we were always around a lot of orchards and things. So I don't know what was looking in the window, but me and my brothers and my sisters, we used to always think we had peeping Toms. And my dad used to always say, don't go in the woods because there's hobos out there. His family was from Arkansas, and they used to say there's get in at night because the boogers out there. I never knew what they meant. So, those were things that happened when I was a kid. And looking back now, I'm like, oh, maybe that's what it was. I mean, I don't have any way of knowing that for sure, but just a lot of weird incidences for sure. But anyway, and then we were living in a house for several years in a small rural community in Oregon. And my husband and I are scuba divers, and my husband would go off because he is a dive master, and he would go off on weekends to help with classes with diving. And I would stay home by myself. All of our kids were grown and gone. And I'd stay home by myself for the weekend while he was off in a class. And we had been in this house for years, and there were weird things kind of happening. And when we first moved there, we had put the house there. It was a brand new manufactured home on its own property. And I remember always feeling like I was being watched. We lived right next to a pasture, and on the other side of the pasture was a ravine, just the other side of the pasture there. And then there was our home, and it was a small residential area on the outskirts of town, right on the line of the border county line, I guess, and city line. And anyway, it was a brand new home that was put there, and we'd been there for several years. Anyway, he would go off on these weekends to help with a dive class. And there were incidences that happened where something had gotten into our trash. It was a tall trash can, and it had a lid. You had to open it up to get in it. But something had gotten into our trash a few times, and I had to go out and pick it up. And it wasn't pushed over, but it just happened to be opened up and the trash taken out. And something had moved it up from the side of the house toward the front of the house. And we were at the dead end of the road right next to the pasture. So, nobody would see much out on that side of the house because no one was out there. So that happened a few times where something had gotten into our trash. And then we had a motion sensory light up above our garage where one of the lights had been broken out, and it was underneath the eave. And so it just was odd, but we never put two and two together. But the light had been busted out. I remember getting in my car one morning. I thought, why is there all this glass here? And come to find out it was because the motion sensor light had been busted out. And then sometimes at night, the side of the house, it would sound like people talking. And, sometimes I would think my husband was saying something to me, or he thought I was saying something to him. And I'd say, hey, are calling my name, or no, I haven't said anything, or he had asked me. But it sounded like people talking on the side of the house. And we just thought it was odd and didn't put much into it. And then there were a couple of times where something would fall off the wall, like something hit the side of the house, but something would fall. And so this manufactured home, like I said, on one side of the house was a pasture. There were no homes behind us. It was a storage unit behind us, so there was nobody back there. We had a neighbor right next to us, and then, of course, the neighbor across the way, but they were right next to the pasture as well. It was a big open pasture, and then the other side of that, like I said, is the ravine. And our bedroom, we had an attached bathroom, and there was a window in the attached bathroom. And I know there were quite a few times where, you get up in the middle of the night to use the restroom, and it just felt like something was watching you. And so I would try to make sure I closed that window at night. And I never did see anything, but it just always had this odd feeling there. But normally I felt very safe in that home. It was never a big issue for me. One time, my husband was gone with his dive class, and I was sleeping, and all of a sudden I got awakened in the middle of the night with this horrible smell. It smelled like sewage and sulfur, and I could hear something shuffling alongside my house. I could hear something out there. Why I didn't call the police, I have no idea. What originally went through my head is calling my son-in-law. And the feeling I got when I was awakened with the smell was dread and doom. It was the oddest feeling. I thought my life was in danger. I thought I was going to die. And I was panicking. I was so scared. I've never felt that much fear in my life. Even when I was a kid, that thing looking at me, it scared me. But, again, it was so many years ago. But the feeling I had in my house, in my own house I'd lived in for years, was dread and doom. I can't even explain how I felt. And I had a flashlight. My bedroom was attached to my bathroom, and I took the flashlight and I'm trying to put it outside the window, like see if I could see anything. And I could not see anything. It was black. And I wouldn't even go to the window. I was still back from the window. And I was thinking of going to another part of the house and trying to open the window or the curtain, or even in my window in my bedroom, I was thinking of opening that. And something told me not to open the window, not to look out. I just had this sense of not looking out. And for me, which is really odd because I'm usually one of those people that are pretty fearless, that if I would have thought somebody was actually back there, like, I don't know, usually I'd have been like, who's out there? What are you doing? I'm going to call the police. That's the type of person I normally would be, but I couldn't do it that day. I could not do it. I could not say anything. And why I didn't call the police, I have no idea. And it never dawned on me to go look for prints. And then it happened another time as well. So it happened twice in that house. The same thing, awakened in the middle of the night with the smell of sewage and sulfur. And I felt like I was going to die. And it was a horrible feeling. And my husband and I, we watched Finding Bigfoot for, 3 or 4 years, whatever. And I would tell my husband, oh, there's no such thing. And that's just silly, and on. And I would say that. And we would listen to things that they would say, the tree breaks, the footprints, the smell, and just all of these things. And one evening we were watching it, and I looked at my husband and a light went on, and I said, oh my gosh. I said, do you remember those prints we found when we were on that hike in Estacada? And he said, yes. And I said, oh my gosh. I said, I'm so glad I probably didn't know about that back then. But I said, that's what it was. I said, the owl, the breakage, the smell, the footprints. And then it dawned on me about the smell I had on the side of my house and the garbage and the light it broke and the banging. There were times where our doorbell would ring in the middle of the night and I would look out and nobody be there. That happened several times in that same house where something would ring the doorbell in the middle of the night and I'd look out and nothing would be there. And when we moved out of that house and I was talking to one of my daughters about it, she's like, oh my gosh, Mom, I had the same feeling out of that window, like I was being watched. So it was just really odd how, as we talked to people and then, learning about how the gait of a Sasquatch, I put on my Facebook account, I was about 4 or 5 years ago. I put on there about my sighting living in California when I was a kid. And my cousin told me, he said, I know where you were living. And I said, you do? And he goes, yeah. He goes, my dad and I went to visit you guys and your brothers and my dad and I went up hunting on the ridge on the mountain above that house you lived in. And he said, my dad had his rifle with a scope and he saw it through the scope. And he said he saw that creature bending down to get something off the ground. And he had me look through the scope to look at the creature. And he said, I tried telling people about it after I saw it. And he said, nobody believed me. So I never shared about it. And I said, well, you never shared with me. And he said, yeah, I know exactly where you live. And he said, I wonder if it followed us back to your house. And I said, I don't know. It probably was already there. It just maybe happened to be up, on the ridge. But he said, yeah, I know exactly where you lived. He said, I saw it. My dad saw it. And so that validated my experience. So I thought, okay, it wasn't a nightmare, which I knew it wasn't. But I mean, I felt so much better when my cousin told me, I knew where you lived. I saw it. And so then I know for a fact I had the other sighting in the rest stop. And so anyway, my husband and I go hiking and camping, and I still have in the back of my mind, like what happens if, but I don't want it to hinder me from, going outdoors, enjoying nature, because I like being able to hike to waterfalls, things like that. But yeah, it's just odd how some of my experiences, I don't recall smell, but other experiences, I did have the smell. And I don't know for a fact that it was a Sasquatch or anything at my house, but I do know whatever was there, it had a horrible smell, the sewage, the sulfur. And I felt like I felt dread and doom. I was thinking about crawling in my closet, but I thought, well, that's not going to do any good. It was just weird. And then I went to bed and went to sleep. And why I didn't call the police, I have no idea. I have none.
My Bigfoot sightings both happened in Colorado. I remember that I was in 5th grade. We were going on a field trip up into the mountains for a camping trip. And I remember thinking I'd be happy to see any kind of wildlife. Because up to that point, all I'd seen was like little chipmunks or birds and stuff like that. I definitely didn't expect to see what I saw. First sighting, it was kind of late at night. I couldn't really sleep because different house, different place, different bed. And one of the girls had left the window open just a little bit because I guess she couldn't sleep without a window open. So I was a little cold as well. I was laying there trying desperately to go to sleep. Then I remember smelling the worst smell I'd ever experienced in my life. I mean, it was like so many combinations of smells. I mean, I got up and I looked around to see if maybe one of the girls who was in the room with me had gotten up to go to the bathroom or something, everybody was still in bed. So I couldn't understand why I was smelling what I was smelling. And something told me to look out the window. I looked out, and the first thing I noticed was how lit up everything was because of the moon shining. And something caught my attention. Something caught my eye at a tree that was maybe 20 feet from the window. And at first I couldn't see what caught my attention. But then I saw it move again. And I saw glowing eyes, almost like a yellowish orange, kind of like the reflection of a cat's eyes. And then once I started focusing on that, that's when I started noticing the rest of what turned out to be a face. I noticed that the head was pretty rounded, and the face was also really wide. It kind of made me think of almost like a gorilla, but yet at the same time it kind of had the human features. And I noticed that the nose was kind of flat, and the nostrils real wide. Didn't really see any teeth or any ears. It was like its hair was covering its ears, which was because of the light of the moon. I was able to see that it was kind of a reddish brown with bits of black and tan all the way through it. And as my eyes moved down, I noticed that it was holding onto a branch that was just below its collarbone, and it had one arm that was down. And I couldn't help but notice how incredibly long it was. I mean, it was like it almost reached below its knee. And then I happened to notice I saw what really appeared to me like breasts. And as my eyes slid down even more, that's when I really noticed how incredibly tall it was. I mean, it had to have been, somewhere over 7 feet at least. And I couldn't see both of its feet, but I could see one. And I could tell that its toes were really big. The foot was really wide. And that's when it hit me that what I was looking at was a female. And I would have thought I would have been scared, but for some reason I wasn't. I mean, it was like I was more excited than afraid. I mean, we stood there, gosh, I don't even know how long we stood there just looking at each other. I mean, I never got the sense of malice or evil or anything like that. In fact, it was almost like I was getting a sense of warmth from her. After some time, she started to turn. She looked back at me for a few moments, then turned back and headed up this hill that was close by. And then she disappeared into the trees. And I remember that the smells kind of stuck around for a little while. After that, I was too excited to really sleep. The next morning, our teacher gave us papers and crayons and stuff like that, and said that she wanted us to pick a tree, study the leaves on it, maybe even make a rubbing of the bark. Automatically, without even thinking, I went straight to that tree where I'd seen her that night. And sure enough, right at the base of the tree, I could just make out her footprints. And I was just floored at the size. I mean, it looked like, it had to have been like 14, maybe 15 inches long. and a good 4 or 5 inches wide. I bent down and I traced the edges. I can almost make out almost like fingerprints, first toe prints. And then I got a sense that I wasn't exactly alone. I looked up the hill, and I'd say about, 20, 30 yards up this hill, I saw a figure standing next to a tree. And to me, it was really clear that it was bigger than the one I saw the night before. It just stood there, like it had its hand resting on the tree, just looking at me. And for some reason, I felt so compelled to wipe away the footprints. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it was almost like something was telling me to do it to, I guess, keep them safe in a way. Some years later, well, like a couple of years after I got married, we'd gone out camping, not too far away from where my first encounters were. It was like a little place just off the side of the road. We'd set up camp and everything, had a campfire. We ate our dinner, drank a little bit, and when we decided to go to bed, I was just laying there for a while, and then kind of off in the distance, I heard really, really loud knock. Couldn't make out where it was coming from. I mean, it was like it was echoing off of everything. I stepped out of the tent and looked around, and then I heard another knock. I mean, it was almost like it was a little louder than the first one. And then it went silent again. Then I heard a third knock, and almost like a whooping sound. Started kind of low, and by the time it finished, it was pretty high pitched. And still, I couldn't quite figure out just how far away it was. But I was sitting there and I was like, could it be? I mean, could it be the same thing I'd seen all those years ago? And my heart was racing. And then I heard a second whoop. But that one sounded further away. I stood there just trying to figure out what I had heard. And when I didn't hear anything else for, gosh, I'd say 5 to 10 minutes, I went back to my tent. But I sat there at the entrance, just looking out at the rocks, the tree line that was just above it, just waiting, just wondering if I was going to hear something again. Next morning, my husband woke me up and asked me why I was laying there at the entrance. So I told him about what I had heard. I tried my best to imitate the sound and everything. He rested his hand on my shoulder and said, "Hon, it sounds like you may have heard Bigfoot." And when he said that, I was just absolutely thrilled. After that, I started doing research, looking into other places where there's been sightings. One thing that always stood out was the fact that the knocking and the sounds. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it might have been trying to warn us we were getting too close to its territory, or maybe it was just letting us know that it was there. I don't know. A couple years later, me, my husband, and a friend of his and his girlfriend went camping. Oh, I'd say it's just the other side of a town called Estes Park, kind of open as far as where we set up our tents. It was really open. But off in the distance, I could see all kinds of pine trees and aspen trees. I think there was even a few oaks that I could see. My husband and his friend got drunk, went to their tents and passed out. Me, I went over and I sat down on this boulder I found. I just wanted to sit out in the open for a while. Just listen to the sound of the wind blowing through the trees. Kind of off in the distance, you could just make out the sound of the river. I was listening to that unwinding. And then kind of off to my left, I don't know how far away, but I heard a couple of knocks. And from the sounds of it, it sounded like whatever it was doing, it had a pretty good sized branch in its hand. Just knocking. And then I turned to my right when I heard what sounded like two rocks smacking each other. I mean, you could clearly tell that it was a rock hitting a rock. And I waited, and again, off to my left, I heard another knock, and then a whoop. Sounded quite different from the last time I heard one. And I don't know, I just felt at ease. I mean, it was like somehow they knew I was there, like they were trying to talk to me or something. I don't know. All I do know is that it took me a while to really actually open up and tell my husband about my first two encounters. And it was not long after that we started listening to like Sasquatch Chronicles, and my Bigfoot sighting, and dogman encounters. And I felt more at ease knowing that I really wasn't the only one out there that had any experiences. That's about it.
Well, that's it for tonight's show. If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let us know. Thanks for listening. Have a great night.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, loves in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. The sound of a memory brings me back to the bluegrass playing on my dad's 8-track. It's pick 'em and it been through it. Getting through the day on Scruggs and Skags, bucking hay bales to those Tennessee jams. There's no other way that I do it. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Somebody going backwards in double time, looking at the soul and the tremolo Kentucky style. Those are the anthems strumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Pace of the city life drives me wild. The only tune is the cars rushing by, with the bass on the stereos booming. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Somebody going backwards in double time, looking at the soul and the tremolo Kentucky style. Those are the anthems strumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Mama's best sweet tea. Got the sound.